of all, welcome to the Arboretum. In celebration of Tree Week, we're going to film a video on how to plant a tree. So that is our goal today. The fall is the best time of the year to plant trees. Spring is the second best. The reason why is it allows them to go over the whole winter time as dormant so the roots can get established. The soil is usually a little bit warmer than we think it is, and so the roots are getting established in the winter time. That allows it to really take off in the spring. It's also a lot less stressful time of the year for them. And we usually get a decent amount of rain. So today, we're going to start off with, first of all, there's two different types of trees you're going to be planting in the fall. There's three different types you could plant, but bare root you're mostly going to plant in the spring after they're already dormant. So the other two we're going to talk about today is containerized, which this one is. You see it's in a pot. The pots could come in all shapes and sizes. They could come up to giant pallets. They could go down to little 1 gallon pots or whatever. Lots of different shapes and sizes, but a lot of the pots are going to be planted the same way. Then the other one is balled and burlapped. Balled and burlapped, you'll see it's got this brown covering on it. With usually, a lot of times if it's a larger tree, it'll have a wire cage, and that is to contain the root ball. It's dug with the tree spade or by hand and then put inside that cage with the burlap to hold it together. So there's a little bit difference on how you treat the roots afterwards, and we'll talk about that. So that leaves us with digging the hole. This may take a while, so go enjoy a cup of coffee or something while you watch. To make sure you don't get your root ball too deep, you can use actually your shovel as a ruler or measuring tape. Hold it up to the side, measure off, and then you can use another shovel or rake to grow horizontal across your root hole, and that way you won't plant your tree too deep. Okay, well, I finished digging the hole. There is quite a few philosophies, theories on how to dig a hole for a tree. Mine, the most important thing is don't dig it too deep. You saw how I measured it with the shovel and another shovel across to make sure I had the proper depth. You don't want to bury the tree up past the root flare, and we will look at that here in a second. So you don't want it any deeper than your tree is. The second one, and this is where the theories vary pretty widely, is how wide to dig your tree hole. Some say 2 times, some say 3 times. I've heard people say you should dig 20 feet out from your tree and amend the whole soil and basically your whole backyard. Some of those I think are a little extreme. Luckily, here at the Arboretum, our soils are really fertile, so we don't have to go to all those extremes. If you had really bad soil, maybe you'd have to do something to those. In some of our neighborhoods, if you have a newer subdivision or a newer house, you may have just clay, solid clay, so you may have to do a little bit more work. But remember, most of your tree roots are going to be in the top 10 inches of your soil. And they're going to spread out way farther than your root flare or your root ball. And so when I dig a root ball hole, or a hole for the root ball, I dig mine slightly larger, maybe 2 or 3 inches larger on each side, so it can easily fit in the middle, and then I backfill around that. I prefer to dig a root hole that's just slightly larger than the pot or the ball and burlap. The reason why is I want that plant to get used to that native soil. It's going to be in it the rest of its life. So giving it a year or 2 of false hope, false reality before it hits that native soil, whatever soil you have in your backyard, it just gives it that false hope. And so I'd rather hit that reality earlier and get used to that soil. Sometimes when you amend your soil, it will cause the roots to actually grow in a ball. They'll continue going around and around in all that nice amended soil until eventually your tree will fall over because it never went out into the virgin, the native soil. So, like I said, this is a containerized or a potted tree, and you want to plant up to the root flare. In a container, it's pretty easy. Usually it's right at the top of where the potting soil and that is. If you get a balled and burlap, it can be quite a bit different. I've seen a lot of balled and burlap trees where the soil is pushed up 3, 4, 6 inches higher than the root flare. The root flare, if you see, will be a section down at the bottom where it's swollen, where you see those roots actually expand out. And so you want to make sure that you plant up to that. If you plant higher, that can lead to rot. On this one, you can also see it's been grafted. So that's why you've got this weird angle, this weird change in bark type, because this is a grafted one. The other thing you're going to want to do for containerized ones is you got to break up all these crossing roots. Inside this pot, it's been growing around and around. This one's not too bad, but to do that, you can use a shovel, you can use a pair of hand pruners, And you're basically just going to want to cut those roots and kind of spread them out a little bit, several places, because they've had that tendency, because they've been in that pot their whole lives, to grow around and around and around. And so you want to break that up and get them to grow out into that native soil, out, try to break up that tendency for them to grow in circles. So you'll cut them several places. Okay, after we've cut the circling roots, we've kind of leveled off the top so we can see that root flare. We're going to put it in the hole. And depending on the size of the tree, that may be easier or harder or easier. Sometimes you have to use equipment if it's a really big bald burlap tree. Now, this is where if you have a bald and burlap tree, there's a little bit difference. If it's bald and burlapped, once you put it in the hole, you're going to want to cut that burlap off as much as you can. You probably won't get all of it off. The reason why, and the wire cage, the reason why is you don't want to break up that root ball. When it's been tree spaded or dug by hand, it's got a nice compact root ball. A lot of times it's in clay or sometimes in sand, but mostly I've seen them in clay. If you start cutting all that wire cage off and trying to rip it off and all that burlap, that root ball will break up, and then you're just basically planting a bare root tree in the summertime. And so you can get it to survive if you keep it well watered, but it's not really good for the tree. But you want to take it down as far as you can on the sides. You may have to leave the bottom piece on because you can't get to it, but you definitely want to cut the burlap off the top and as far down on the sides as you can get, because that burlap will actually wick moisture away from the tree up into the air. It acts kind of like a candle or any other type of wick. It'll actually take the water from the ground and pull it up, and once the sun hits it, it'll just pull more water out of the ground. So you want to get it definitely below the ground. The same with the wire basket. You want to cut it down as far as you can. One of the biggest reasons why is so that in the future, if you're mowing around it, you don't grab that wire cage and tear up your mower, hurt yourself, tear the tree out of the ground. So you want to cut that wire cage down as far as you can. It also helps those roots that are growing, they're going to grow out, so they don't have a wire stuck through them. I've seen quite a few trees that have died, and you take them up, you can still see the wire, and the roots have grown through that wire, or it's been incorporated into the roots, into the trunk. So you want to cut it down as much as you can, but doing that without really disturbing the root ball, without letting that root ball break up. But with a containerized tree, it's a lot easier. Most of them are totally filled with roots, so you can't really break up the root ball much. So after you've got it in the hole, it's to the depth you want. Your next biggest challenge is to getting that soil worked in around the tree, and also trying to get the tree somewhat level. I seem to have a crooked eye, so every tree I plant almost seems to be, every one of them seems to be crooked. Sometimes it can help to have somebody else look at the tree and see if they can help you make sure it's level. You can probably get a level out and put it on it as well. I usually don't go to that extent because eventually, no matter how I plant it, the tree will at least grow upright towards the sun, or towards the grow upright. So you're going to take the soil, you're going to push it back into the hole around the tree. All right, so now your next biggest challenge is how to get that soil pushed back in there. A lot of people, if you read the books, they say avoid stepping on it. A lot of people take their boots and want to push that soil in with the bottom of their boots. That can compact the soil too much. It's like you're basically compacting soil you just loosened up. If it's a big tree and I need a little extra stability, what I will do is take the end of the shovel, and in a couple of spots where I need, just kind of pack that in there a little bit. This one, I mean, it wouldn't be bad because it's just a small container. But if you pack that in a couple of spots, that helps push the soil and kind of compact it down low. And you can put some more in. But most of the times I just kind of work it in with my hands. And you're going to want to try to form somewhat of a small basin with your leftover soil. Remembering again, you don't want to bury up that root flare. You want it still showing. And the reason why you want to do, it is a good practice to put in a small basin for water, is with newly planted trees, you're going to want to water these. especially the most important watering is right after they're planted. You're going to want to water it in. It doesn't matter if it's going to rain that evening. It doesn't matter if you're planting them in the rain. You still need to water them in. Okay, with watering it in is one of the biggest, most helpful things you can do for a tree. First of all, it settles that soil down. You saw how I just kind of pushed it down with my hands. So there's a lot of extra space in there, a lot of air space. And that water will help carry that soil particles in and fill up all those air pockets. So that's number one. Number two is the tree's just gone through a lot of stress. I've just ripped it from its pot. I've cut its roots. So it needs water to recover from that stress. It also helps it make it through the first week or so of life. A lot of trees, even if you don't do anything else, you don't water them the rest of the year, you need to water them in. A lot of times that's all you need to do. But if it gets really dry, trees need about an inch a week. So if you get a couple weeks after you plant, a week after you plant it, if you haven't had rain, you're going to want to water it with a 5-gallon bucket or 2, depending on the size, and water that whenever it's dry. If we get an inch of rain a week or 2 inches that week, don't worry about watering it. But if we don't get any rain for a couple weeks, you're going to need to water that tree, especially for the first year of its life. The first 6 months or so are really critical. Okay, we've watered it in. We've finished cleaning up around it. The tree's looking really good. There's just 2 more things we want to talk about. First is staking. You see this bamboo stake on here? You'll find these on the nursery trees a lot, and they do this to get a straighter tree, because people like to buy straight trees, not crooked trees. So they'll put these bamboo stakes in here to straighten the tree up. And it does that really well, but once we get into the landscape, we want to take that off, because one of the side effects of that is because that piece of bamboo has been providing all of the structure for that tree. So without that stake, in stakes or trees without stakes, they build reaction wood along the stem, and so that'll keep that tree upright. But when you give it artificial help, like a bamboo stake, it can't do that on its own. So we're going to take that stake off. I may have to attach a little bit because this one's really wobbly, but we've added a T-post that we're going to put in here. We're going to attach it twice with cloth straps, one probably here and one further up high. And the reason why we do that is those cloth straps allow the tree to move a little bit. And so when it moves in the wind, it builds that reaction wood along the base. And so it'll strengthen this, and so eventually this tree will be able to hold itself up. You only want to leave it staked for a year or less. You don't want to leave it on for 5 years, 10 years, because then you're acting like a crutch, like the same thing as this bamboo pole. And so you're weakening the tree itself. So only for a year, just to help it out to have some structure and for it to stand up on its own. And lastly, we're going to mulch it. You're going to want to use an organic mulch, that being leaves, shredded wood, compost, things like that. You're going to want to use an organic mulch because that will help moderate the temperature in the wintertime. It also helps keep the soil moist in the summertime. Okay, and with mulch, you're going to want a good 3-4 inch deep layer. But one of the things you want to do is you want to pull that away from the base of the tree. The reason why is that compost, that mulch, whatever you're putting on, it is just acting like that soil, and so it's going to hold water right against the trunk, and the trunk isn't really adapted to have water against it all the time. So you're going to want to pull that away, make it look kind of like a donut around that tree, just a couple inches, and spread that mulch out, and there you go. The tree is ready to go. Just keep it watered if it's dry, and it'll produce for a long time. Okay, well, thanks for sharing your time with us on this video. Go outside, plant a tree this fall. Support one of your local nurseries, and have a good time outside. Enjoy the fresh air. Thank you.